It's been a mad few weeks in the world of AI. Elon Musk recently launched his uncensored Grok large language model. Meanwhile, over at OpenAI, Sam Altman launched a whole bunch of different features at the OpenAI Dev Day. So, to help me understand these changes and what they mean for the world, this week I am speaking with Alex Ker. Alex is the founder and chairman at PAI. He is a fellow at a whole bunch of different venture capital firms. He's a former editor at the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI, and he's a content creator. So, without further delay, this is the Complete Tech Heads. I am Tom Edwards, and this week I bring you Alex Ker.
Complete Tech Heads.
Alex, thanks so much for jumping on. How are you doing?
Good. How are you, Tom?
Yes, very well, thank you. So, lots of stuff that I want to ask you about in the wonderful world of AI. But first up, I would love to get a bit of an intro to you, your background, your interests, and kind of where you come at this industry from.
Yeah, so happy to chat a bit about my background. So I started getting interested in AI in high school. So initially did some research at the Computational Cognitive Sciences Lab at MIT under Josh Tenenbaum. Really interested in understanding intelligence more widely through whether that's understanding machines more or developing these systems that can mirror human intelligence. And I think it's one of the key questions to increasing like human productivity and thriving. And yeah, got into AI research and decided that the shipping rate of academia is kind of slow, where you're not getting much user feedback. But it is very cutting edge and interesting work, but just not personally for me. So got in more into venture capital and startups. So worked at Neurable, which is a Series B brain-computer interface startup for around a year in machine learning. And also worked at several funds doing machine intelligence investing. And now, I mean, everyone's picking up on ChatGPT, which is super exciting. So trying to publish a lot more content, a lot of my personal takes on Twitter and just cool projects, just hacking together with the new API. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I follow you on Twitter. That's how I kind of came across you. I saw your NBA commentator video that you put out. It seemed like it did pretty well. How did you do that?
Yeah, I think it is pretty straightforward, honestly. There's a bunch of templates and cookbooks on OpenAI's website where you can just clone the repo and modify it a bit. So what I did is they had a video to text to voiceover pipeline already set up. So
Okay.
I just used that, modified the prompt to talk in the style of Mike Breen. And also I had to kind of tinker with the sampling rate a little because I was hitting their very strict daily rate limit. And so I pass in a video frame essentially every 5 seconds, and then just hacked that together and made a cool clip. And I guess it went pretty viral.
So it's just looking at one frame every 5 seconds. So it's not actually watching the video. It's just very intermittent frames.
Exactly.
That's amazing because it's really convincing. Like it's amazing that it's able to do that without seeing anything in for those, for that space of time in between.
Yeah, I think it's super amazing that it's understanding what's actually going on in the video.
Yeah.
So
That's
crazy.
because, like, I mean, I don't know if you know what frames it saw, but like, what if it hadn't seen the ball go in the net?
Yeah, so someone actually asked this question in the comments, which is, what if it missed that frame? And my guess is, since GPT, this is still GPT vision, right? So GPT is a large language model. I suspect that there may be data leakage in that already understands that this is a major game, and it's been trained on the sort of data of, oh, Damian Lillard shot this three-hand kind of be the Thunder back in 2019 and picked up that info elsewhere and then incorporated it into the voiceover. So that's also a potential.
Okay. Yeah.
area
So what you need
of-
is a fake game to see whether it
yes,
did it
yes.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
And I think something to point out is I did try to have it classify like what player is doing what thing. As in like Damian Lillard is shooting the three on the last possession and like Paul George is the defender, but it couldn't like, I said explicitly, please like classify the players and it just can't do it. So I had to give it the context of Dame Lillard is handling the ball and Paul George is guarding him. So
okay. Okay.
yeah, it's not totally magic.
So I mean, it's still pretty good, isn't it? It's amazing the things
understood what's going on. So
yeah. It's amazing the things that we nitpick about AI systems now. You know, we're so used to them being so good. It's like, oh, what, it couldn't do that one thing. Like as soon as there's something that it can't do that you could do, you sort of think that it's not very good anymore. But it's like we forget how far we've come in the last like year.
Yeah. Well, look, I think there's a lot of cool, interesting sports applications. I got some comments saying, can this be applied to like sports scouting, where you're sort of in the future able to identify which players which, and how many possessions they have, how many assists they have, how many field goals they have across various sports, and sort of identify which are the underrated players, and kind of track analytics more like in a more automated way, in a more granular way. So I think that's like a super interesting application that this demo can't do currently in real time, but will be done in real time probably in the next like 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. And there's so many analytics in sports already, right? I mean, I don't really follow American sports, but certainly in soccer, football as we call it, there's like an insane amount of analytics already. Like there's so much data. I'm sure people must be doing this already, building all sorts of crazy stuff with all of the vast amounts of data that they're already pulling from sports teams.
Right. I think one thing to note is it is very expensive to process the data at the moment. And I think this is why the demo only works well on short clips.
Right. Yeah.
This is a 30-second clip. And I ran it around like 5 to 10 times. I don't remember the exact number when I was testing it, but it costed me around 50 cents. But if I know some folks were thinking about like security camera footage where you can identify like anomalies. And if you don't need like a human looking over the security footage, what if you can just get alerted? I think that application is still very difficult because that's not a 30-second footage. That's a 24-hour footage. Yeah. And that will be like thousands of dollars, right, to run each day, which is well, hundreds and thousands a month.
It's quite a scary thought though, isn't it? When every security camera throughout, like, I mean, London's got an insane number of security cameras, right? Like, a hive mind knowing everything you're doing and presumably thinking from the expression on your face. Kind of
they track that level.
There's definitely a dystopia movie in there somewhere, isn't there? So look, I wanted to talk to you about Grok. I know that you've got more knowledge about GPT-4, GPT Turbo, OpenAI than you have of Grok, but what are your initial impressions of what you've seen of Grok so far?
Yeah, I think it is really impressive how the XAI team were able to put this together this quickly. Especially, it's like a really small team. And several interesting things I noticed about the model is it is less lobotomized, as in it is less censored, which is more fun. And so you can explore, I guess, a wider range of behavior and kind of the fringe behaviors of the model, more so than GPT. So I think that's very useful. And I think it is more appealing to the users from like an agent or assistant perspective, because I think when humans or a lot of my friends are interacting with like GPT, sometimes it gives a very bland response, or people say it sounds very GPT generated, where it's very formal. It has this formal tone. It's somewhat rambly and it repeats itself sometimes. Whereas I think the Grok angle is, since it has more of a personality, it's just better. Like the users love it better. So I think that's a cool aspect. And I tweeted about this also, which is the RLHF potential of Grok, where since you have this massive live stream of data basically coming in every day, 500 million, around 500 million tweets of all formats. So it could be like photos, videos, and just text. And it'll be interesting to see how they can use this proprietary data, because only Twitter has it and only Elon has it, which means only the XAI team has it. Nobody else in the world has it, because they're preventing anti-scraping at the moment, and how they're able to kind of use this data stream to better refine Grok. I think that's something I'm watching out for.
I noticed one of the first things Elon did when he took over Twitter, as it was then, was get a lot more serious about their data, right? Like he made API access a lot more expensive straight away. And I think that was something that, I'm a marketer, right? Like a lot of the marketing analytics tools that we use were all built on the Twitter API because it was so open. But I think they perhaps didn't realize the value of what they had. And I think Elon definitely does, right? And right. We're starting to see that now. You mentioned RLHF. I am aware of what it is, but for listeners who may not be, could you give a brief kind of like 101 on what it is and why it's important?
Yeah, so RLHF stands for Reinforcement Learning from Human Feedback. And it's, I think, the simplest way to explain it is the thumbs up or thumbs down feature on ChatGPT. So when it generates a response, when you're interacting with ChatGPT or any chatbot, there's like a thumbs up or thumbs down feature where you vote on the quality of the response. So instead of just training the model on being the next best word or sequence prediction, which is what these large language models or transformers are doing, you're post the training process, you're sort of like fine tuning the model on human feedback, and you're telling the model how what types of behaviors are users looking for, which may actually differ from its original training data. And in this process, it makes the model just better and more useful to humans who are using it. Yeah.
And so this is something that OpenAI use for their models, right? How, and I know that you don't have, insider access to the way Grok's built, but how do you see the potential of X being used to improve RLHF on Grok in a way that perhaps OpenAI might not be able to do?
Yeah, I think there's several interesting ways where since you have 500 million a data set of 500 million each day, I was hypothesizing, and Elon said true actually to this tweet, and he did a laughing emoji. Yeah, I don't know if this is like he's agreeing with me or he thinks it's a joke. I don't really understand, but I said something along the lines of like, you can use community notes or some ratio of like likes and bookmarks or retweets or comments as like an indicator for how well the like to kind of use that as the RLHF data. So if you think the OpenAI case, it's a direct thumbs up or thumbs down, but for Twitter, instead of thumbs up or thumbs down, it's actually a much richer data source. And then you can sort of use that to fine tune the model, which would be cool. I think maybe that's how they're doing it, if he said true.
That's amazing. So like the way I've kind of understood GPT-4, whatever, is that it was a model that was trained, and then you can then access that by messaging it, and then you can then it gives you a response based on the kind of intelligence that it's built up. Is there any possibility that a model could be being actively trained in real time by something like, Twitter's ongoing data set? Is that like technically feasible?
I think so, but it would be very, very expensive and very, very hard, is the consensus I got in the replies to my post, where, it's just too expensive and it's just like not financially feasible, I think.
Right, okay.
So they would have to like sample or filter the data maybe in some way to just like maybe pick out the most salient tweets that are useful. I don't know. But yeah, I don't think it's possible in real time to continuously train a machine learning model. So how people right now are doing modeling in industry and like production is essentially if the data set drifts, which is a common behavior of like, say consumers behave one way when they interact with their ML model, they sort of like buy certain clothing, for example, this season, and next season it's suddenly winter, so they're buying like warmer clothes. The model's predictions are no longer accurate. So what they do is every month they would like retrain the model and redeploy the model accordingly to how the data drifts and how the distribution shifts over time. So I think that sort of like batch training would be possible, but it's still a huge data set. And I think people made the fair point in the comments that there is a lot of noise in X, where there are still a lot of bots. There are still a lot of people just shit posting and posting random stuff that may not be helpful for like a quasi RLHF process. So they'll have to do some like filtering or denoising first.
You could definitely get, if you wanted to extract humor, which seems to be like something Elon Musk is interested in.
Yeah.
If you just filter for tweets that have got 150 likes or more, you would definitely extract some real funny like tweets from that, right? Or posts, whatever they're called now. You'd definitely be able to like triangulate over humor in like the funniest possible way. I think like it is a kind of humor factory in many ways, X, I think.
Yeah, I think the internet rewards people for being funny.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of funny things.
Yeah. Well, X definitely does anyway. Like Instagram rewards people for being good looking, right? Which is why the only funny stuff you ever see on Instagram is a screenshot of a tweet.
Right? Yeah, that's right.
But X definitely does. Twitter's always been hilarious. It's always been a kind of cesspit as well in many ways. But it's like I often kind of think that's humanity, like
that's humanity.
Like you've got to take the rough with the smooth. Like humanity's not perfect. Like the Solzhenitsyn quote: "The line between good and evil runs through the heart of every man." We've all got that darkness in us somewhere as well, I think. So it's like if you want a true representation of humanity, I think that's you start censoring and you lose it. It's like the lobotomized effect that you were talking about with GPT. It does feel like that's been creeping in. Do you think that they've been doing a lot of work to moderate the output at OpenAI?
Yes, I definitely think they've put some sort of filter on it for safety and alignment reasons. I don't know what that means. I'm not that informed in AI safety or AI alignment research, but it seems that they're protecting against like malicious outcomes. Like I think one of the worst outcomes for X as a platform or just for content and social media in general is like just the proliferation of bots, and that are basically that passes like CAPTCHA tests, that passes these like verification tests to being human, and then sort of just like spamming the platform, and it just becomes even more of a cesspool of bots and deep fakes, right, on Instagram's case. So I think that case would be very bad, and that's probably like the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
for for a lot of
It
problems.
must be. Is it a real difficult technical challenge? Using the knowledge that you have of machine learning, to moderate the output of a large language model in that way? Because I guess it's not like just simple, decision trees of, like outputs, right? Like they can't just look for particular words and then give a stock response against them. I wouldn't have thought. Like, presumably you've got to do some work to integrate the filter into the large language model response. Or if I got that completely wrong?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's this interesting dichotomy of like people with generative AI. It's almost this like GAN model where it's like the generative adversarial network, where on one end you have the generator, on the other end. So this is a particular type of model. The other end you have like a discriminator, and then they kind of improve in tandem, where the generator is trying to generate more and more deceiving content, but the discriminator is trained more and more to discriminate what's actually good versus bad. So I think it's, at the end of the day, it might be just like machine learning models trying to like see whether you can fake the discriminator or not. The discriminator just trying to like filter everybody out.
Yeah, it's a mad world that we're kind of walking into, right? Where there's so much of this is going to be going on under the hood, and people just have no idea about all of the kind of technology that's going into the things that they're reading. It does kind of freak you out a bit when you think about it like that. So, just to finish up on Grok quickly. So, like we've been speaking about all of the data that they've got at X and how useful that could potentially be. How and why, if at all, is that different from all of the data that Google have got, that Facebook have got, that Microsoft have got? Like, they're all sitting on vast amounts of data, right? Like, is there any advantage there to having Twitter as opposed to Gmail or whatever?
Yeah, I think all the data sets are really different. For example, Google probably has a huge data set on everybody's search behavior. So that's like intent. Like, what are you trying to like answer? Like, what kind of products are you trying to buy? On Amazon's case, for example, it's I think it ties into like the functionality of the platform, the app or platform itself. On Gmail, it's very professional communication, where you're saying like, oh, let's set up a time to do this, or like, can you do this by then? So I think there's this professional tonality to it, even also on LinkedIn as well. Whereas on Twitter, I think there's a lot more like stream of consciousness and people saying what they want and people saying their thoughts and their interesting takes. So I think the data tends to be less like sterile and more like opinionated. I think there's more like polarity or diversity to the data, which could be interesting compared to something that is like, you're not posting what you would post on Twitter, on LinkedIn, right? So
Yeah. A LinkedIn large language model would be like dull.
It would probably make some very cringe, like motivational. Yeah, I think it might be even worse than like GPT. So I mean, that's why they're not like training anything.
Yeah, man, I don't want to see that large language model. Jesus. Cool. All right. So look, OpenAI Dev Day. I know we're slightly behind it now, but everybody's had a chance to kind of really dig into the stuff that they announced. There's lots there. What were you most excited about?
Yeah, so I actually had this list of features that I think are super underrated, and that is not GPTs. Like obviously the first thing you think of is like the GPT store, right? Yeah. Where a lot of people are saying, oh, this is like the new app store, like this is the new Shopify. Like if you are one of the first developer where you become a top developer on this store, you can capitalize on the revenue sharing. Yeah, I think that might be true, but it's still, I think I still need to see whether how much of the value capture is there for your average developer, or does OpenAI as like a platform capture most of the value?
Yeah.
So that's to be determined on
Yeah.
whether it is the next app store. But
I kind of struggle to see it intuitively. I kind of feel like I don't know. It doesn't feel to me like it has as much like diversity as like the App Store did. It felt like a whole new world with the App Store and apps, and like
yeah,
there's so many things you can do where you can imagine the real world applications. I kind of feel like, well, you know, the outputs from GPTs, they're all kind of, you know, they're just like someone talking to you in a different accent, you know, or with some different
right,
knowledge.
right,
Like,
right.
it doesn't feel like it has that wild diversity that the early days of the App Store did to me. But maybe
Yeah,
I'm just naive. I don't know.
yeah. Folks are saying it's glorified like pre-prompting or glorified custom instructions,
Yeah.
where you sort of inject this kind of personality to GPT, but at the end of the day, it's not like a fundamentally innovative feature, which I think I agree with. But going back to your earlier question, there are
Yes.
like many things that happened at Dev Day that I think Sam sort of like breezed over what he said like one sentence about, but are very interesting from like a developer perspective. One is multiple function calling. So that's calling many actions with a single tool or prompt. Calling many actions or tools from a single prompt. Another is JSON mode. So what a lot of people are struggling with is with large language model outputs, people want it in a consistent format, especially if you're passing it into some other application where you're doing something with the output. But as you know, these models are like probabilistic. It's not deterministic generation each time, so there's variety in it. And they introduced JSON mode to kind of give you structured JSON each time, instead of sometimes saying like, here's the JSON for you, and then giving you the JSON. It's like, I don't want here's the JSON for you. That's annoying for my like downstream system to parse, right?
Yeah.
So I'm glad they're like enforcing more of a structured and predictable format. And they're also giving, a super interesting development is like RAG, retrieval augmented generation, which is like basically grounding the output on certain documents or databases, so to prevent hallucination. So if you look on the platform right now with GPT or with the Assistant API, you can like attach files. So the hope is the model will use the information in the source file you give, instead of coming up with something it just thinks is right. So there's a lot more certainty. So I think those are super interesting features. And obviously, like the vision thing with the basketball demo, it's like available to everybody now, like advanced data analytics or code interpreter. So yeah, that suite of tools are available.
Yeah. So because the documents upload that you can do now, so we're building a product at the moment, and we've just been literally taking whole documents and dropping them all into the prompt, right? Into like pre-prompting, and like reworking them a bit often, but that's just a massive shortcut, right? But I imagine lots of people have probably been doing similar previously. So it
In
kind of
lane
feels
chain,
like,
people were doing it in lane chain.
and it feels like they're kind of moving towards where their audience is, right? They're presumably looking at what people are building and trying to make that quicker and easier. But it seems like in the process, they're cutting the legs off of lots of startups, right? Like,
there were a lot of memes actually when I'm sure you saw them during that day. People are just saying like all these YC rappers are dead, like goodbye. And then it's like, oh, look at Sam's face when he like killed all like hundreds of thousands of startups.
Yeah. And it's like the caption, pretty cool, huh?
yeah.
So just briefly for people who don't know, just the this idea of GPT wrapper which
Yeah.
has been kicking around. Just explain just briefly what we mean when we say a GPT wrapper.
Sure. Yeah. So I think what GPT wrapper generally means is that OpenAI has an API, which is essentially what an API is a bunch of functions you can call to interact with a large language model and its functionalities. From if you're building an application on top of it. And what a GPT wrapper does is it's a front end or some application, user-facing application that does not have as much engineering complexity. It's not, I guess, like technologically innovative. It's more so just using the OpenAI existing functions and the API in a very interesting and intuitive way for the users.
It's funny that this, because it's kind of become like a derogatory term, right? A GPT wrapper. Like, I think the implication is that you're not really adding value on top of what ChatGPT can already do.
Yeah.
But like, you didn't see, like, there were lots of like in the dawn of social media, there were lots of tools that were built on top of the Twitter API, Facebook API, whatever, that that again weren't hugely technically complex, right? They were just sort of pulling data and putting it into pie charts or whatever, and you kind of didn't have that same like negative take that seems to be kicking around for GPT wrappers. I suspect maybe it's because you can do it in plain language. So it's like before it was developers were able to be the gatekeepers kind of, whereas now anybody can do it. It kind of feels like more of a effective neg.
Yeah, I think I agree with that point where there is like less engineering work or complexity required, which results in less of a moat. Because before, technology companies, a lot of them are essentially AWS wrappers, right? Like you have these AWS instances and S3, and you're like, you set up your infrastructure as like a B2B SaaS company on top of these things. But no one's calling you like an AWS wrapper because there is still like a lot of non-trivial work on the back end, on the front end of building the application itself. Whereas I think OpenAI is taking a lot of the engineering work away, which makes these businesses less defensible. And that's what that's why people have this general like negative sentiment towards the wrappers.
Yeah, it's interesting. So do you think all GPT wrappers should all be worried? Are there any GPT wrappers that you've seen that you think actually there is a business there, they are adding value, and that there is some kind of future? Or do you think that it's all just been kind of killed off?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot with a great future because not all like GPT wrappers are created equal. Like, for example, there are GPT wrappers kind of consolidating workflows that are very, that involves like multiple prompts or a chain of prompts before you get the thing you want. And if you can consolidate that in sort of like a visual UI or something that's more intuitive than prompting, because people are lazy, they don't want to prompt, they don't even want to sign up for like a GPT account. There is that like opportunity for you to like serve the market really well for that one specific use case. But I think if you're a generic like PDF chat, the most generic cases, like that's the hello world of GPT wrappers, which is chat with PDF. I think if you're the generic wrapper, that might be I think right now might be a scary time for you. But I think there are PDF chat AIs that would do really well if they already have sort of existing brand. They have like a lot of customers and they're serving their use case very specifically. I think the overall, my overall take on this is like, if you serve one vertical, like one segment really well, and you don't build with everybody in mind, you're going like very niche and very deep, and you're building orthogonal to like what OpenAI would incorporate as a feature in the future. I think it is a sustainable business, but I think it's not venture backable. It's not like $1 billion outcome. I wrote a piece on Jasper AI and how they had to like fire everybody and because they raised a
Wow,
bunch
did
of
they?
money.
Yeah, that
And
was the one that
yeah,
I was thinking of. That's
yeah,
like the archetype of companies that have been killed by the recent Dev Day, right?
yeah. I think it's more important now than ever to focus on marketing and your brand essentially if you were operating a GPT wrapper because the technology is essentially all handled by OpenAI. It's commoditized. The only engineering work you're doing is building like a front end. So
Mm.
what differentiates you at the end of the day is like how you reach your users, your distribution strategy, and how you kind of build habits of the users to keep coming back to your app versus someone else's, because
Yeah,
everybody has access to the same technology now, and
yeah.
that's not the competitive edge.
You mentioned trying to be orthogonal to what OpenAI is going to develop in the future. That sounds like a very difficult task, right? Like how would you think about pursuing that as a strategy?
Yeah, I think don't build things that OpenAI might incorporate as features. For example, PDF to chat is a very wide use case. It's a very common use case, which is file uploads in general, file compression. Um, OpenAI may add that to their platform, but say you're in a really antiquated and traditional industry like agriculture, and you have this data set as a business you've been collecting over 2 decades, and it's a very high quality data set. You clean it very well, and then you fine tune GPT-4 on that model. I think that would be a super powerful value add to your existing business, or if you were selling some prediction or inference service for say farmers or like agriculture, that that is a compelling use case that OpenAI as like a platform would not go under because it's so specialized. And if you look at OpenAI's like go to market strategy, they're not like targeting specific populations to send them paid ads. So I think there's still a lot of opportunities in sort of the specific like vertical use cases.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean they don't need to, do they?
yeah.
They've kind of captivated the world. Like they could own any industry they want if they wanted to, but I guess they've got better things to do, right? Than spend much time marketing. So, in terms of the future of AI, in terms of the things that it's going to be able to do, like, how do you think about job displacement? Do you think every white collar worker now should be worried about the job?
Yeah, I think it's really funny how it's not the physical manual labor that gets replaced first, to your point,
Yeah,
because we're still so far off from robotics. And it's actually like the more intellectual, like computer jobs that are getting
yeah,
displaced first. I think, yeah, like even engineers, right? Even like software engineers are under a lot of pressure because of things like code interpreter and these AI systems that can be essentially like a pretty good entry level engineer. And that means you don't need as many of them on the market. So I think people will experience displacement, and you do need, I think the skill is less technical now, and it's more like the central skill we're looking at is like twofold. One is how good you are at writing or communication. I think that's always important because essentially to use any AI system, you're using like natural language to tell it what you want. But if you can't articulate what you want as a result of the system, or how to like chat with ChatGPT, or how to prompt, it's going to be very hard for you. So I think communication and just good writing is very important in the next few
yeah. It's
decades.
interesting
Yeah.
that because that's the main thing it does, right? But it is still important. I often find that like when you get bad responses or responses from a prompt that you don't want, or that it's wrong somehow, it's because you're not doing a good enough job of articulating all of the different criteria, all of the different priors that you have in your head that you're not kind of consciously aware of, right? So if you're an expert in an industry, there's lots of background knowledge and context that you just know intuitively that ChatGPT doesn't, right? And so listing out all of those is part of the job. Articulating yourself is like the thing that you've got to get good at, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's one thing, just like, so English majors might be making a comeback. So, and
I love the implication that they're somehow dead currently.
yeah, I mean, that's what a lot of people are saying. But yeah, I think good writers are always underrated. And the other thing is just how like strong of a personal brand you have, or how strong I guess like how you interface with the market will be very important as an individual, like employee, because engineering or certain skills like copywriting is becoming more and more commoditized through like GPT and these large language models, where it used to take a lot more skill to write a good copy or write a good piece of code. But right now, if you're a beginner programmer or a beginner copywriter, you can learn much faster using like these large language models, where you don't even need to learn the skill. You can just like use it to generate stuff if you know what you want, and generate very good pieces of code and very good pieces of writing if you give it a very good specific prompt. And I think that is making people who are, I guess, like more senior engineers or more senior writers positions like less defensible. And I'm even starting to worry, like as an engineer, of like how much like leak coding, like how much just coding do you actually need to learn when in an age of when these large language models can just look at like parameters and fill in your functions and can just do these basic tasks for you. So I think people should think more in the framework of like, how do you become like an architect, or like just like higher levels of abstraction instead of how do you design software systems instead of like, how do I write this function, or how does this function work?
Yeah. I guess I think your mic is scratching on your jacket a little bit. Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I guess eventually we're just going to get to a stage where it's like ideas is everything, right? You have the idea, and then it can just do it for you. You know, like there'll be agents that can execute any of your ideas, and you just go up levels of abstraction every time, right?
Yeah, I think we are entering, and I was going to actually tweet about this later, maybe like this week, but I think we are entering like an age where good taste and good aesthetics are going to be valued more and more, like good ideas, as you said, and good judgment, rather than just the purely technical skills.
100%.
When the large language model handles all of the technical aspects, right?
Yeah, decision making, right? Like the decision making will probably be the last vestige of kind of human authority, right? It's the last thing that will hand over. We'll be holding on to making the final decisions on things for far longer than we hold on to the technical implementation, right? Because we want to feel like we're in control until eventually. Right. We'll probably let the AI.
Well, I think self-driving cars are already making that decision. They're not like checking every time they want to turn. They're just turning, at least at the moment.
So I don't know if you have any views on open source AI or open weights AI. I've heard it called. I had a guy called Joseph Jackson. I don't know if you know him from OSS Capital. Commercial open source is his thing. And he's very much a kind of evangelist for, the only moat is your rate of innovation. It's all about innovating quickly, and we shouldn't be trying to protect any of this stuff. Just move faster, and so he's of the belief that open source is going to be the way forward, and that it shouldn't be kind of in these silos. Have you interacted much? I mean, I would assume you have interacted quite a lot with the open source AI community, but I'm not sure. Is it something that you've got any strong views on, particularly in the context of, all of the legislation that's starting to kick off?
Yeah, I think it is very good that players like Facebook are open sourcing models like Llama 2, and then you also have Mistral, the startup in France. You can also fine tune on those models. I think you're able to understand what's going on in the hood, and if you don't want to go with like the the OpenAI API, it's a great way as a developer to explore these different options and avenues and have these serve as an alternative for OpenAI, because you don't want to rely on like a single incumbent. That sounds like a monopoly, right? Yeah. Which is not good. It's not good for innovation. So yeah, I'm definitely for open source, but it is a lot more work to set up like these open source models on like individual machines, and if you're fine tuning on them, it is a lot of work compared to something like just using the API straight out of the box. Yeah. Like the NBA thing, if you were to recreate that in open source, I think it might be harder.
Yeah. It's like, because Elon Musk obviously set up OpenAI to be open. I wonder whether Grok is going to be open, because it doesn't seem to be at the moment. You would think that would be one of his main motivations. Yeah, I was just saying, Elon Musk set up OpenAI to be open source, right, and now it isn't. I wonder whether Grok will ever go open source, because it doesn't seem to be at the moment.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think it's going to. I mean, I don't know what his plan is, honestly. So, but yeah, it does seem it's like a private beta at the moment. Yeah. They haven't released any of the weights, anything.
Yeah. So that Joseph came on was says that he doesn't refer to it as open source. He calls it open weights, because there's not really any source code to speak of. So that's how they refer to it. They don't call it open source.
Cool.
So look, before we wrap, there's one last thing I want to ask you about, which is BCIs, brain-computer interfaces. It's a subject that I've been interested in for a while. So what was the work that you were doing in the BCI space?
Yeah, so I was at Neurable from basically during the pandemic, from May of 2020 for around 8-10 months, and was working as machine learning capacity there. And what it's doing is we were building these headphones that takes these electric signals around your ear. So there are these different lobes in your brain, and there's like the temporal lobe, which is closer to your ear, and reading kind of electric signals which are your brain activity, and using extensive machine learning pipeline to clean up the data, to filter the data, and to predict how focused you are at any given time, whether you should take a break, whether a certain type of music you're listening to is good for productivity. And sort of this is a very useful application for like wearable AI. So you can think of it almost as like a Fitbit, but for your brain. Whereas Fitbit is for like your health generally, and then there's the Oura Ring. So I think it's all sort of in the same sphere. And I also wrote like a pretty viral tweet earlier this summer on Apple actually filed this patent on AirPods. And I think they're also doing a similar play where they're putting electrodes, where they're thinking, I think that's like an active research area. I don't know the status because I don't have information on like the Apple research team, but it seems that they're adding some sort of sensors to AirPods that can also read your brain activity. So hopefully giving you better like health analytics and feedback, like in a pretty good fine-grained level.
And so this is all outside the skull, obviously.
Yes.
So because you have two different types of BCIs, right?
Yeah.
There are some that actually
Right, invasive and non-invasive. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so do you lose fidelity staying outside the skull? Like, is the quality of the data better if you're able to actually make contact?
Yes, I think the data quality is definitely a lot worse outside the skull, which makes it a very hard machine learning problem. Of like, sometimes I think when I was doing the work, I even wonder like, is there even any signal to be read? Because it is so noisy. Like, so I think it is a very challenging engineering task, but at the end we were able to read like some signal. So I think it's just it's sort of just the robustness of your pipeline and like whether you can solve the engineering problem, and it's like definitely an active research area. And I don't think anyone has done it really well just yet, like as in like commercialized a product that really stood out like the iPhone or
Do you think it's quite far away, like a real kind of consumer product that actually works?
Yeah, so I'm no longer at Neurable, but they did have a Kickstarter campaign where you can order these headphones.
Okay.
And I think I'll be able to try them soon, but it is limited to like the stationary case where they're assuming you're sitting, so the contact is good on the electrodes.
Right.
But on the invasive case, like what Neuralink is doing, where they're cutting a piece of your scalp open and like inserting this sensor thing, I think that case is definitely a lot more research oriented, where they're doing clinical trials. They're focusing on people with like neurodegenerative diseases, and that will be the case. So that's very far off from like your average consumer. So I do think the timeline for both is like at least 5 to 10 years out.
Yeah. So I guess what they are identifying actual, like, well, maybe not neurons, like regions of the brain, I guess, that they want to go into. Like the electrodes aren't going on the cellular level in terms of specificity. I wouldn't have thought. Like, it must be a group of neurons rather than.
Yeah, I think it's a group, but it is a lot higher fidelity because with EEG you can't like identify groups.
No. So you've just literally got this random jumble of electrical activity that you're just having to do insane amounts of work on to try and pull some kind of coherence.
Signal. Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Okay. Interesting problem to work on, though, I bet.
Yeah, it is very fun, but sometimes it can be very frustrating. But it is, I mean, that's like all scientific problems, right? If you're working at the cutting edge, right, you never know what's going to happen. It just also could just not work.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, look, we've we're coming up on an hour, so you've been very generous with your time. Thank you very much for joining me, Alex. It's been super interesting. Where can people check you out?
Yeah, people can check me out on X or Twitter at the Alex Ker, one word. My DMs are open, so feel free to reach out to me, and I'm always happy to chat about AI, startups, future of work, anything there.
Awesome. All right. Well, look, it's been super fun. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for reaching out, Tom. It's been talking.